This is part 5. Um, the second thing that we can do in preparation and to be ready for the return of Christ is prayer, a growing prayer for evangelistic prayer that the author talks about. I have included in your study guide a website where you are going to find verses that relate to God's overarching love and involvement in the nations. If you remember back towards the beginning of our lesson, Jesus actually asks of God for the nations. So you would assume that his love is not just on an individual level, even though it is, but that he is zealous for the nations. He is a pursuer of the nations. And as a result, we should be in the same not just line of thinking, but heartbeat, that our love for the nations, that should certainly not grow cold. In fact, that should be reignited. And so what I want you to do is I want you to begin to see that while, yes, I'm going to be taken to glory, you are going to sit among the nations. What a glorious thing to think about. That I am just one among the nations. It makes me cry because I had the privilege of being able to be in another nation for quite some time, and to think that God just reaches out in every country, to every tribe, to every tongue is absolutely crazy and amazing. But that this coming God is going to judge, he's going to rule, and he's going to reign over these nations. And so what I want you to do is I want you to look at this website. It's actually by YWAM, and choose 3 of those verses. And then I want you to ask this question: how does this verse reorient, meaning change the direction of your heart towards evangelistic prayer to all peoples? This is really important as a church that we look at this, because we certainly do not represent physically all nations. Now, that's not necessarily a problem initially, because we're kind of hemmed in. We're a little bit of a bubble, but that doesn't mean that we should stay that way, that our heart should be way beyond that bubble, should see a vision for the nations, should act upon that through both prayer and action, whether we're giving to the nations through missions, or whether we're reaching out to our local areas of Rocky River and North Olmsted, and these areas that have massive populations of people who represent the nations, or whatever that may look like in your workplace, that our prayer becomes, Lord, give me a heart for the nations, because one day you will call all nations to yourself, and you will actually say that every knee is going to bow, every tongue is going to confess, and I want to be a part of leading the nations to you. It's interesting on page 58 as you do this. I want you to keep this in mind, that God uses circumstances to bring the nations to him, and usually, many times, it's times of trouble. In fact, on page 58, the author says that we should be anxious to see something that will arrest or capture the nations, all the peoples, and cause them to stop and think again. I couldn't think of a better, kinder way to arrest the nations than to keep them in their homes. There's a verse that says that, do we not know that it's God's kindness that leads us to repentance? Is it possible that in God's kindness he is allowing these difficult times to bring forth a harvest. I've been hearing as I've been reading that in some of the nations, this has been like what the pandemic has allowed a wildfire of evangelism to take place. Is that happening here? Are we praying for it? Or are we praying to get through the next day? And so, so my question to you is, are you involved in that evangelistic prayer of God using situations to arrest the nations, to bring them to